Okay, so I have two articles for you today, and both of them are happy articles. And they're both from the Advocate. The first one is Wyoming library director wins $700,000 after being fired for defending LGBTQ plus books. And the second article, which we will get to later, this is an old one from 2022 from the Advocate. Since we are on the eve of National Coming Out Day, normally I don't do articles like this, but I'm doing this for people who might find this video who are scared about coming out because of how that's going to affect their lives. So just to show you that, gay people have always existed, they've always thrived. So if you're in a shit situation, it truly does get better. And if you are a bigot who seems to think that certain people just started existing once you found out that they do exist, which I never understood, how you think certain things just started happening because you heard of them. Never understood that. But this will also show those people that no, gay people have always been around. So I will do that after the Wyoming article, since that's more topical. That's from today. I think it's from today. Let me just... Oops, it's from yesterday. All right. So, but back to the article. A former library director in Wyoming has won $700,000 in a settlement after she was fired for refusing to remove books containing content about sexual health and LGBTQ plus identities. Now, I don't know if that sexual health is only pertaining to the LGBTQ plus community or all sexual health. It wouldn't surprise me if it's all. Terry Leslie, director of Campbell County Public Library, was removed from her position in July 2023 after 27 years of service when the Campbell County Library Board voted 4-1 to fire her. The board had pushed for 2 years to convince Leslie to remove the collection of books, which some had claimed were inappropriate for minors. Under the settlement, Leslie has agreed to drop her lawsuit against the state, though a separate lawsuit she has filed against the 3 individuals who challenged the books will move forward. I do feel vindicated. It's been a rough road, but I will never regret standing up for the First Amendment, Leslie said via the Associated Press. Some of the books Leslie refused to remove included Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison, This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson, How Do You Make a Baby by Anna Fisk, Doing It by Hannah Whiten, Sex is a Funny Word by Corey Silverberg, and Dating and Sex, A Guide for the 21st Century Teen Boy by Andrew P. Smiler. So the book that specifically says it's directed toward teens boys is inappropriate for teen boys. Cool. All right. Leslie's firing came not long after the library board voted in October 2022 to leave the American Library Association, a group that promotes libraries, and the Wyoming Library Association, its state chapter. So, way to scream, we do not understand libraries at all, than to do the exact opposite of what libraries are meant for. What exactly do you think you're accomplishing by removing yourself from the state and National Library Association simply because, I guess, because they actually promote the First Amendment? I mean, that's quite a flex. Book bans were at a record high 2 years ago when Leslie was fired, a record that has since been broken. During the 2024-2025 school year, PEN America recorded 6,870 instances of book bans across 23 states and 87 public school districts, affecting 3,752 titles. They represented the work of 2,308 authors, 243 illustrators, and 38 translators. We hope at least that it sends a message to other library districts, other states, other counties that the First Amendment is alive and strong and that our values against discrimination also remain alive and strong, said Leslie's attorney, Iris Halpern. Those are public entities. They're government officials. They need to keep in mind their constitutional obligations. Ah, yes, but haven't you heard that only the Constitution only is for the Democrats? Republicans don't need to give a shit about the Constitution. They can use it as toilet paper. But it's nice to see that not everybody sees it that way. All right, so that is the first article. So now let's go back in time to 3 years ago when The Advocate published 17 iconic same-sex couples throughout history. All right. Whenever and wherever and whenever LGBTQ plus people have lived, they have loved. Whether they found romance in ancient Egypt or 1920s Ceylon, the history of queer people and their lovers is rich with devotion, betrayal, and activism. Throughout history, same-sex couples have fallen in and out of love and experienced joy and heartbreak just like anyone else. For anyone who can't get enough of vintage love stories, here are 17 same-sex couples who have defined queer romance over the centuries. Now, before I continue, it's very important to emphasize that same-sex couples fall in and out of love, experience joy and heartbreak just like everyone else. Simply because there are so many homophobes out there who seem to think that homosexuality is strictly about sex and that romance is not a part of it, that they are just hypersexual, which not the case, never was the case. I mean, I'm sure there are some that are, just like there are straight people who are, but to try to other same-sex couples simply because you want to make them out to be strange and worthy of contempt. Anyway, let's get to the first couple. Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West. So, sounds like she was married. Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Not Vita. The ladies met at a 1920s dinner party where Woolf offered to publish a book Vita had been working on with her husband a few years earlier, relating to each other over their emotional absent parents. They became confidants and lovers from then on. Together, the two flourished creatively. Oof, that's gotta sting, that you're working on a book with your husband and then you leave, then you basically have an affair behind his back with the woman who is supposed to be helping you publish the book. Ouch. During their 10-year relationship, West inspired the gender-shifting protagonist of Woolf's Orlando, a biography. Woolf, who had been abused by her half-brother, opened up about it to West, and with her, Woolf was for the first time in her life able to have a satisfying sexual relationship. Their affair ended in the late 1920s on respectful terms, and they remained close friends. Their husbands also showed a high level of respect. Although both lady spouses knew about their affair, they never did anything about it. Now, that is very cool. That they basically both had open relationships in this regard. That their husbands knew about the affair and they were like, okay, sure, fine, whatever. Now, that, especially considering we're talking the 1920s, that is very cool. That is very, very cool. West and her husband had an open marriage. Well, that answers that question. Well, Virginia's husband wanted his wife to be happy. Wow, that is quite a forward-thinking. Both husbands are very forward-thinking in that regard. You know, this idea that of an open marriage. I mean, that's relatively unheard of still in this day and age, even though it's more common, but still very rare. But in the 1920s, having a husband who only cares about his wife's happiness and, you know, that's because this is still at a time when women first barely got the ability to vote. They needed their husband's permission to still do a bunch of stuff like get a credit card or probably take money out of the bank. So to have someone see her as her own person and not as an extension of him, and that he, you know, whatever makes her happy he's cool with, is quite a forward-thinking concept. All right. So let's move to ancient Egypt. And how do I know it's ancient Egypt? The names. All right. Oh boy. I'm going to totally butcher this, so my apologies to any Egyptologist out there. All right. I'm not going to. Kumhotep and Niakum. Yeah, I know I totally butchered both, but alrighty. Their love certainly stood the test of time. Ancient times, to be exact. The two were servants who lived in Egypt around 2400 BC. Manicurists to the royal court who waited upon the pharaoh himself. Kumhotep and Niakum were found buried. Why won't you move? Were found buried together in the tomb of King Unas. How do we know they were lovers? Their bodies were intertwined and their faces were nose to nose, a tradition that marked the dead as married couples. And another thing, for people who poo-poo and use religion as a reason to poo-poo homosexuality. Christianity is not the end-all be-all. Other religions existed, and not all of them cared about whether someone was homosexual. So, and this is a proof of that. When their tomb was discovered in 1964, they were reported to be brothers. Because, of course, in 1964, and this still happens, historians will talk about roommates being really good friends. It's like, no, no, they weren't just friends. Same thing here. They couldn't possibly have been lovers. They must have been brothers. Now, it's entirely possible they did not know at the time about the married couples custom. That's a possibility too. So I could be a little bit too harsh. But in the late 1990s, Egyptologist Greg Reeder became convinced they were lovers. On the tomb, Neakuren's wife was depicted in a banquet scene, her face obscured. Khnumhotep occupies the place that denotes a wife in many of the scenes. Ouch. Again, it's possible that the wife was totally cool with it, or considering this was ancient Egypt and the way, I wouldn't say women were treated completely like property because, there were female rulers. It wasn't completely unheard of. But yeah, I'm going to say that she really didn't have much say in the matter. Egyptologists believe that Khnumhotep and Neakumen's names were strung together in a way that means joined in life and death. All right. Moving on. Ann Lister and Ann Walker. And one is spelled with an E and one isn't. Just so you know, they are the same name, but they're not the same spelling. You have heard of this couple from the recent HBO series Gentleman Jack, but the story of Ann Lister and Ann Walker was a defining moment for lesbians and marriage equality in Britain since they exchanged vows in 1834. Wait, legally? That would be super cool if that was legal. Lister was a wealthy English landowner famous for her world travels. Her openly queer lifestyle earned her the title of the first modern lesbian, and her extensive diaries chronicling her romantic and sexual relationships. Lister met her young heiress, Ann Walker, on various occasions in the 1820s, and by 1832 they had fallen in love. They took communion together on Easter Sunday at Holy Trinity Church in Goodramgate, York, now marked with an official blue plaque as the site of the first lesbian wedding to be held in Britain, though the marriage was not legally recognized at the time. Okay, so it wasn't legal, but still. Commitment ceremonies have been a thing for years, obviously. All right, the couple lived together in Lister's estate, Shibden Hall, until her death in 1840. So yeah, still cool. And I wonder if she hadn't been wealthy, if she would have been even allowed to get unofficially married. Because let's face it, especially back then, I mean, even now, but in different ways. Rich people get away with stuff that nobody else can. Okay. Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas. Lesbian icon and pioneering writer Gertrude Stein found true love in Toklas, whom she shared a life for nearly 40 years. They met in Paris, sharing creative ideas in a salon that welcomed Picasso, Matisse, and Ernest Hemingway. And neither one of those women are beauties. Although it was the 1920s, the couple celebrated their love in public, but some secrets of their partnership remained private until the 1980s, when Yale University opened a locked cabinet I'm pretty sure when held was not right. When held hundreds of love letters between the two. Again, that is very cool that this is happening in the 20s. All right. Because I didn't say goodnight and I miss it so, please know how much I love you, Stein wrote to Toklas in one of the discovered pages. Um, hmm. Interesting that she's a lesbian icon and that they shared a life for nearly 40 years. Simply because, how was that allowed? I guess it's possible that, just like historians say now about, oh, they were very good friends. That's maybe how society looked at them. Or because they lived in Paris, it wasn't as verboten. I don't know. Okay, moving on. Ethel Collins Dunham and Martha May Elliott. Martha May Elliott and Ethel Collins Dunham, two doctors who got their medical degrees together from Johns Hopkins, met while they were students at Bryn Mawr College. They decided to attend medical school together in 1914 and forever stay by each other's side. Though they were both active in fighting for women's right to vote, their ambitions to medicine separated them until they were both invited to the brand new pediatrics department at Yale. Both pioneers in their own right, they changed the role of women in children's medicine forever. During the Great Depression, Elliott was an architect of the New Deal's programs regarding maternal and child health, and later she was named chief of the Children's Bureau, a federal health agency by President Truman. Dunham's focus on caring for premature babies and newborns established the national standards for how hospitals care for babies. She became one of the first female professors at Yale's School of Medicine, while her partner was the first female member of the American Pediatric Society and the first woman to become president of the American Public Health Association. In 1957, the American Pediatric Society awarded Dunham its highest honor, the John Howland Award. She was the first woman to receive the honor. Elliott was the second. So that is very, very cool. That is definitely a power couple. Okay, Michelangelo and Tommaso de Cavalieri. Though known for painting chapels, Michelangelo was far from a church ideal in his romantic life. Well, yeah. The two met in 1532. Tommaso de Cavalieri, who was 23 years old, was known as exceptionally handsome, fitting the 57-year-old Michelangelo's ideal of masculine beauty. Well, at least they were both adults. Michelangelo dedicated a series of drawings and dozens of love poems to the Michelangelo dedicated a series of drawings and dozens of love poems to the young man, calling de Cavalieri the light of our century, paragon of all the world. Letters exchanged between the artist and the Italian nobleman showed that they carried on a mutual romance. De Cavalieri married in 1548, but the two remained close until Michelangelo's death in 1564. Well, of course he married because, that was the thing to do. So, especially if you're a young nobleman. Anyway, moving on. Lily Elba and Gerda Gottlieb. If you've seen The Danish Girl, you know about the romance between these two early 20th century artists. But the movie omits that both Elba and Gottlieb identified as LGBT. Hold on. Am I thinking of the right film? Because, what? Lily born Einar Magnus Andrea Wagner met Gerda at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen and married in 1904. Elba specialized in painting landscapes while Gottlieb illustrated books and fashion magazines. After filling in for Gottlieb's absentee model and putting on stockings and heels, it became clear that Elba identified as a woman. So, yes, I am thinking of the right movie. Which, why are we surprised then that she identifies as LGBT? I mean, that the movie omits that. It's like, she transitioned. Okay. Gottlieb saw herself as a lesbian and even created famous lesbian erotica paintings. The couple moved to Paris to live openly. Gottlieb rose to success as a painter using Lily, dressed as a femme fatale, as her muse. So that answers the previous question that it was, lesbians were allowed to live openly at that time. Not sure about gay men, but lesbians at least definitely. In 1930, Elba's gender dysphoria drove her to seek out gender confirmation surgery in Germany. The procedure was highly experimental at the time. Lily is one of the first identifiable subjects and took 4 operations over 2 years. As Elba's procedure gained press, Danish courts invalidated her marriage to Gottlieb, who remarried and moved to Italy. Well, that sucks. I mean, Lily wanted to live life as a woman, and Gottlieb's like, see ya. I mean, that's sad. She knew that she identified as a woman. What? Having undergone several operations before the age of antibiotics, Elba died of an infection in 1931. Ouch. Okay. Now, another name that might be familiar to people. Oscar Wilde and Lord Alfred Douglas. The inspiration behind the picture of Dorian Gray, Lord Alfred Douglas caught the eye of Irish writer Oscar Wilde in a way immortalized in literature. The two met in the summer of 1891. Although Wilde was married and had 2 sons, he began a doomed affair with Douglas, who was 19 years his junior. Their love story was often one of pain. Douglas was known to be spoiled and reckless. The two often fought and broke up. Once, after Wilde nursed his young lover through influenza only to contract the disease himself, Douglas moved to the Grand Hotel and sent Wilde the bill on his 40th birthday. Oh my God, how... this is one of those times when you're like, why are you with this person? Seriously, why? I would rather be alone than with someone who treated me like that. But then again, I'm also asexual, so maybe I just don't get it. When Douglas's father grew suspicious about their relationship, he launched a campaign against Wilde that eventually led to his arrest on grounds of gross indecency, code for being gay, and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. It's always I always found it interesting that it was always just that one person, because, obviously the younger one is just this poor innocent, and he would normally not be gay otherwise. Anyway, Oscar Wilde was released. The two tried to rekindle their love, only to be forced apart by their families, who threatened to withhold funds. So, yeah, that is very, very sad. Okay. Um, this is one that I think I covered in one of my online classes. Emperor Hadrian and Antonius. Romantic relationships between older and younger men were common in ancient Rome, but the story of Emperor Hadrian and his young confidant Antonius stands out. Hadrian, who ruled the Roman Empire from 117 AD to 138 AD, had a special relationship with Antonius and traveled with him on a tour of the empire, with Antonius part of the emperor's personal retinue. When Antonius died in 130 AD, drowning under unexplained circumstances, Hadrian was so heartbroken that he remained in mourning for years, filling his palace with statues that resembled his lost lover, naming stars and flowers after him, and holding festivals and athletic games in his honor. Antonius was eventually deified and worshipped as a god by a cult that spread throughout the empire until the end of the 4th century. Okay, hopefully we'll get to more happy stories, but Dorothy Arzner and Marion Morgan. When people say there's yet to be a lesbian auteur in cinema, they're forgetting Dorothy Arzner. Arzner, the only successful female director during Hollywood's golden age, was romantically linked to stars including Alla Nazimova and Billy Burke. But everything shifted when Arzner met Marion Morgan, a vaudeville dancer and choreographer on the set of Fashions for Women. An entrepreneur herself, Morgan led her own performance troupe. The two began a romance and collaborated on films for decades. Meanwhile, Arzner helped launch the careers of Katharine Hepburn and Lucille Ball and became the first woman to join the Directors Guild of America and direct a film with sound. Successful businesswomen, Arzner and Morgan commissioned architect W.C. Tanner to build them a Hollywood Hills estate where they lived for 40 years. Okay, yay, a happy story. Always good to see. Especially since we're considering the time we're dealing with. All right, Benjamin Britten and Peter Pears. Peter Pears, Jesus. Engaged in nearly 40 years of a passionate romance, British tenor Peter Pears and composer Benjamin Britten brought heart to the opera house. Heat. I think I should stop. I'm starting to not being able to read. In 1976, Britten asked a friend, publisher Donald Mitchell, to tell the truth about Peter and me in the form of releasing 365 love letters exchanged between the pair from when they first met in 1937 up to that year. The two were also in love with each other's artistry. I find other singers rather non-inspiring to write for, Britten wrote in 1965, calling his lover potentially the greatest singer alive. The feeling was decidedly mutual. It's you who have given me everything. I am here as your mouthpiece and I live in your music, Pears replied. The two traveled the world as partners in life and music, performing in concert halls and for Holocaust survivors. I live for Friday and you, my man, my beloved man, wrote Britten, who died of congestive heart failure in 1976. Pears died of a heart attack 10 years later. Again, considering the time period we're talking about, to hear about happy love stories like this warms your heart. All right, Tennessee Williams and Frank Merlot. No one knew raw sexuality better than Tennessee Williams. author of A Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and A Streetcar Named Desire, and one of the most consequential playwrights in history. When he was 36 years old, he met Frank Merlo, a Sicilian-American actor 11 years his junior, in New Orleans. A year later, they were madly in love. After the success of Streetcar, the two traveled the world in the late 1940s and 1950s, summering in Europe as Williams sought inspiration in Rome, Barcelona, and London. Merlo became Williams' personal secretary, creating order in his life and helping him deal with his constant struggle with depression. The two split after 14 years of harmony, unable to work through infidelity and drug abuse on both sides. Ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Shortly after their breakup, Merlo was diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer. Suddenly, none of the wounds of the past mattered. Williams returned to nurse his lover until cancer took his life. Consumed by the loss of his true love, the Tony winner became plagued by theatrical failure, drug abuse, and depression. Through his later life, he was in and out of treatment facilities, unable to live up to his creative glory. I don't like these sad stories. I really don't. All right, Sally Holly and Caroline Putnam. These lifelong companions met at Oberlin College and became agents of the American Anti-Slavery Society as soon as they graduated. The couple traveled on the abolitionist lecture circuit alongside Sojourner Truth, fighting for black people to be freed. After the Civil War and emancipation, the two split to pursue their calling for justice. Holly gave talks in the North, raising money to educate freed slaves, while Putnam went to Virginia to teach them. She ended up founding the Holly School, named after her partner. Holly joined Putnam in Lordsburg, Virginia, where they taught together at the school year-round. Dedicated to the encouraging and enabling black men to vote, when they as women still could not. They died having left the school to an all-black board of trustees who kept it open for decades. All right. Edith Ann Somerville and Violet Florence Martin. Throughout the late 19th century, Irish novelist Edith Somerville wrote in collaboration with Martin Ross, who in reality was her second cousin, Violet Martin. Okay. Publishing 14 stories and novels, the two achieved success under the pseudonym Somerville and Ross. While the exact nature of their relationship is a subject of debate, they lived together like a married couple in Drishane, County Cork. And later in her life, Edith became a close companion of lesbian composer Ethel Smith. After Violet died, Edith continued to write under their shared pen name, convinced that the two could communicate through spiritualist seances. Oh boy. Now, technically, incest. However, it's not like they could bear children, so... Anyway, moving on. Greta Garbo and Mercedes de Acosta. Mercedes de Acosta, a successful poet, playwright, and screenwriter, was an out and proud lesbian who bragged that she could have any woman she wanted. After meeting Hollywood icon Greta Garbo in 1931, she knew exactly what woman that was. Again, I don't know if things were different for lesbians than gay men, but being out and proud in 1931, ballsy. The two began a relationship shortly after their introduction, but it was never smooth sailing. At times, Garbo opened her arms and heart to DaCosta only to pull away. They drew inspiration from each other, while DaCosta penning a screenplay for Garbo to portray Joan of Arc, but it was never filmed. But their romance was never dead, even when it was over. Garbo wrote DaCosta 181 letters, cards, and telegrams. In 1959, when DaCosta was destitute, she sold them to the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia. I would not have had the heart or courage to have burned these letters, DaCosta wrote to William McCarthy, curator of the museum. Greta's and Marlene's, who are lovers, I only hope they will be respected and protected from the eyes of vulgar people. Convinced DaCosta was bad luck and upset that she was open about her queer relationships and memoirs, Garbo decided to erase their romance from her life completely. When DaCosta was dying, a friend asked Garbo to write her goodbye, but out of pain and fear, Garbo refused. Ugh, that's both sad and also understandable. Because again, we're talking the 30s. This was not exactly a time where people were accepting. I mean, we seem to be backtracking nowadays when it comes to accepting homosexuality. So, all right, Walt Whitman and Peter Doyle. While some scholars tried to deny that the nature-loving poet was queer, I wonder who those would be. Most agree that Walt Whitman had a romantic bond with Peter Doyle, a streetcar conductor he met in 1865. According to Doyle, the men met at a hotel after his shift and were inseparable for years. We were familiar at once. I put my hand on his knee. We understood. He did not get out at the end of the trip. In fact, went all the way back with me, Doyle said in 1895. It's believed that Whitman disguised Doyle's initials in his notebooks by using the code 16.4, representing the 16th and 4th letters of the alphabet. Because again, homosexuality was not accepted. All right, Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok. Though we don't know for sure if it's the most consequential U.S. First Lady, though we don't know for sure if the most consequential U.S. First Lady was a member of the LGBT community, it's believed she fell for journalist Lorena Hickok. Which, yes, that would put her part of the LGBT community. Alrighty then. They met in 1928 when Franklin D. Roosevelt was running for governor of New York. He was elected president 4 years later, and by the time he was sworn in as commander-in-chief, the First Lady was already wearing a sapphire ring bestowed on her by Hick, as she affectionately called Hickok. The journalist joined the Roosevelts every Sunday night for dinner, went on trips with Eleanor to the opera, and was the first to interview her as she took on the White House. When apart, the two professed their love via telephone and letter. Roosevelt even kept a picture of Hickok in her study. But don't worry, I'm pretty sure her husband had affairs, so I don't think that was a issue. All right. So that was the last couple. So, I believe that is all I have for this video. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.